this is an indication of where journalism is in Britain. And the reason I picked this is because it's the Times of London, which is like a proper paper. You know what I mean? Like, this ain't like the Daily Mail or the Sun or anything like that. They're supposed to know. And this is a news piece. Okay, one of the most downloaded podcasts in the US. It has raised fresh questions about the show's journalistic integrity. And it is now facing accusations that it may have broken a British court order. Okay, we're facing accusations by this reporter. Okay. There's no official body that has raised this accusation. Then there's a quote. It feels as if it has reopened old wounds, a senior teacher at the school said. Okay. What makes it worse is that the podcast gets so much wrong. Now, if you were a journalist and someone gives you that quote, I hope your instincts are, can you elaborate on that? What does the podcast get wrong? The quote ends there. Okay. The Times can reveal that since the release of the podcast, teachers and governors who were implicated in what happened are using it to try to clear their names. Shut the fuck up. A piece of journalism came out that suggests there was like new details, and they're using that to say like, hey, there was new information. Isn't that our fucking job? Okay. Nick Timothy, who comes up in the podcast, Theresa May's former chief of staff, that's the Prime Minister's former chief of staff, is threatening legal action against the publisher over claims it made about his involvement. Well, where are they? Where are those legal actions? You know, we have long passed the time on that. Nick Timothy did not move. So again, you're just taking what Nick Timothy's saying without asking, is that true though, Nick? Okay. The show has already had to re-record one section after admitting it had not correctly represented the interview with Humanist UK. That is true. That is true. We had to go and say he said there was maybe 2 sources, as opposed to he said there was no sources. So that's fair. Good point there. Questions have been raised about the journalistic rigor of the presenters. Hamza Syed was a student, true, who expresses clear bias throughout the series. We can talk about the whole bias in the series stuff. That's a whole thing to unpack. At the time the anonymous letter emerged in 2013, an investigation found that it was probably fake. We don't linger on this. You know, it was probably fake, and yet we've allowed so much serious stuff to happen. We don't linger on that or reflect on that. But concerns about the safeguarding of children were discovered. It's so passive. Who discovered them? What was discovered? Like, what's the details here? Inquiries uncovered lessons being narrowed to comply with conservative Islamic teachings, and pupils allegedly being told that white teachers do not have your best interests at heart. Now, the fact that you still have to preface this with allegedly, and it's now, 2022, and this thing happened in 2014, that means you've done no work still to confirm any of these details, which, by the way, are not true, which we tell you in the podcast, which if you'd listened to would have been informative. Since then, staff of the school have worked hard to win back the trust of the community. That's neither here nor there for me, to be honest. The podcast may be facing claims it is in contempt of court after naming whistleblowers granted immunity in one of the many tribunal cases. Now, here's the thing which I want to highlight. Not true, obviously. Otherwise, I'd be in court right now defending myself. But the British government, knowing the podcasts were coming out, sent around a letter to all the editors of newspapers and broadcast networks to basically say, this podcast violates a court order, or may violate a court order, and which protects a few whistleblowers in this Trojan Horse story. So essentially, be wary and don't report on it. We didn't know this. And for about a week, we were on this kind of like ridiculous PR kind of like campaign when the podcast comes out, doing a bunch of interviews, and no news reporter is engaging with us. It's all like artists and critics, you know, like that's the thing with doing a podcast. It kind of falls in this weird space where it's media as well. So again, loads of just people just talking about the aesthetics and stuff. Got it. And then this Guardian reporter called and said like, oh, it's funny, I had this whole interview lined up for you guys, but I had to change it because my editor called and said, no, there's like a court order. So just ask them about how them two became friends or something, you know?
Which is a question we'll get to in a little bit.
I'm sure we will. Yeah, I'm sure we will. So she tells us this is the first time we hear that this is letter going around from the government saying don't basically ask these guys any follow-ups about this. So now we're pissed off for a number of reasons because it took about a year with standards and legal, the New York Times, to make sure that we went nowhere near that court order. So we took so much care to make sure everything that was reported goes nowhere near this court order that does exist, that does affect the case which we did not speak to at all. So given this, no effort was made by any journalist, editor, their legal team to contact us. Instead of just getting this threatening looking letter from the government, deciding, well, it is in their best interest for us not to cover this story. Let's just do our due diligence and follow up. Ask them, what specifically in this podcast can we not go near?
Right.
Because the other stuff we will speak about. No. Just a blanket ban on reporting about the Trojan Horse because of this letter.
I think in some ways it's a legacy of their own making, right? That they would have to correct in coming back to this and reporting on this. And it seems like they're very conveniently using this court order to not have to rehash that.